Welcome back to our module on creating a transformational culture. We're going to be focusing this session on the invisible dimensions of culture. So getting an understanding of what it is that really makes up those pieces of culture that are in the interior dimensions as we've identified on the integral framework here. So we're looking at the four quadrants again. Remember, culture is on the collective axis and on the interior axis. So it's the dimensions of a collective that we can't see and understand just by looking at it. So just by going in and observing how things work, that doesn't give us information about culture. And that's why anthropology, for example, developed as a practice, a discipline where you actually have to sit in the culture, ask questions, get a feel for it, and that's how you come to understand what it is that's under the surface of that culture. So this Iceberg model has often been used as a way of talking about culture. You have above the surface of the water the behaviors, the stuff that we can see, the things in the integral model that are in the outside, the exterior, the behaviors of the individuals, the systems and structures, the architecture, all of these things that have actually been generated out of the shared values and beliefs of that group of people. So if we look at the Iceberg model, underneath the behaviors and practices, right at the foundation, you've got core values. The ideas that we've learned from various different contexts about what's considered good or bad, what's considered to be right or wrong, what's desirable or undesirable, where are the boundaries of what's acceptable and unacceptable. And how are those shaped? Those are shaped by many different contexts, of course, by our upbringing, our parents, our schooling, our social context, our religions, our educational system. Many different factors that are influencing those core values. Our media increasingly plays a big role. And those core values start to shape our attitude, which can be defined here as the core values, the way the core values are reflected in specific situations in daily life, such as working or socializing. So you have this foundational level of core values that reflect our attitudes, and from our attitudes, we then behave and show up in the world, and that's what people can see. One of the important things then about culture in organizations is we have to be really looking at these elements here, because people are going to be bringing in all sorts of invisible dimensions to the organization coming from their own background cultures. So if you're trying to create a shared culture in the organization, then you need to find a way to engage the culture which people are coming from, how they're bringing that in, and create through your shared vision and goals a sense of a culture that can transcend those individual differences. And that can really give people a feeling of belonging to a community that has meaning to them. In Ken Wilber's integral work and looking at these developmental models, he uses a concept around conventional, pre-conventional, and post-conventional. And what that means is there is a conventional level, you could say, of development, which is how our society expects one to behave. So the general norms of a collective, be it a society or an organization, developmentally. So, as we move through the blue, more order-driven structures and culture, and into the orange culture, which is far more where the free market has come from. It's about opportunity and choice and continued progress and research and scientific materialism, all of those dimensions. That, you could say, is the conventional level of where our culture is now. And then in our education systems, in our legal systems, we basically ensure that people move from the pre-conventional, the phases prior to that conventional level, so that they can operate at this shared level of agreements around what a healthy society or collective is. Now, when you start to notice some of the limits of that culture, as we were pointing to in the S-curves, that culture has maybe reached a boundary. It's starting to create a series of problems that it couldn't foresee when it first emerged with its way of being. Then you start to get new ideas emerging at the next level of the S-curve and start to get the post-conventional ideas coming in. So culture at that stage moves into a transition where the conventional level starts to come under attack and fall apart, and post-conventional ideas start to come up. Now, what's really important to pay attention to at that point is the moment that the conventional culture starts to come under attack, initially from the post-conventional mindset, so the new thinking that's emerging, that people who are operating at pre-conventional, so before they've actually grown into the conventional, will join in the attack, and you'll often get quite a confusing scenario. So, for example, you can see a critique of capitalism that's coming from more the ecological community, let's say, who's understood capitalism, been through it, and then got a sense of its limits. So a post-conventional critique of capitalism. But you'll also see a more ethnocentric critique of capitalism coming, for example, from a Taliban-style community that says in our holy book, it says that these things which mean that capitalism is not good. So you can see how that coming out of more of a purple-red ethnocentric developmental level acts as a pre-conventional critique on the conventional system and starts to get mixed up with the post-conventional. So as we're looking at culture and getting a sense of the next steps, it's very important for us to distinguish between what might be pre-conventional critiques and post-conventional critiques of the culture. The post-conventional ones are what's going to take us to the next level. It's what's going to help the culture shift, help the culture become transformational. But if we draw in the pre-conventional, it'll really start confusing things and drag us down, and there'll be a lot of resistance to moving because people will feel, well, we've been there before. This is a less informed and complex critique of where we are than a post-conventional, and it all starts to get muddled up together. And at the same time, all of these things that are under the surface of the iceberg are playing a role. So how we relate to religion, how we relate to our past, our history, how the media is influencing the communication. And all of those things, of course, carry great weight. Religion, history, they're all things that play a big role. Our family, all heavily influence us and are sensitive subjects that we've tended to protect. So the reason it's important for us to understand this distinction between pre-conventional and post-conventional is that when we go through culture change, which is happening a lot in the world at the moment and will be part of our organizational transitions, that when you're anti the conventional, when you're anti the current worldview, the current culture, you're going to get pre-conventional and post-conventional critiques of that current situation. And what you need to do is tease out the differences, because what we want to do is amplify the post-conventional critiques, which are more informed by the reality which we've already been through and can see the value of the good things that we want to take with us and then add new things to it. That's the positive side of the post-conventional that wants to build on where we've already been, whereas the pre-conventional simply wants to destroy the conventional. And because it's not actually been there yet, it can't appreciate the good things. And it's tempting when we're in a kind of activist, anti the current establishment mood to want to bring all the anti together, to bring the pre-conventional together with the post-conventional and create one great force to attack the conventional. That's a very dangerous strategy to adopt, because then we start confusing more informed with less informed critiques of the status quo, and that will discredit the movement as a whole. So it's very important to make that distinction between what is an informed post-conventional critique of where we are and what is a less informed, destructive critique of the current situation. So that's our session, just looking at some of the invisible dimensions of culture and the importance of making those distinctions. And what we're going to do in the final session for this module is look at how culture is created through the relationships between people, the field of relationships that exists, and how you can do your best to keep that field as clean and as vibrant as possible.